Welcome back, aliens. My name is Davin Reddy. In this video, we'll talk about microservices. Now, to understand microservices, let's go back to 1970s. That's right, when the computers were new. So in 1970s, we were trying to solve simple problems with the help of computers. Maybe scientific problems, but then they were simple in today's term. Now, after the successful use of computers for the scientific and research purpose, we thought, can we use it for commercial use as well? And that's where in early 90s or late 90s, a lot of companies started using softwares and computers for their internal use. Also, we also got social media websites in early 2000. But now, if you try to understand the entire ecosystem, or if you try to understand the world of softwares, everywhere, in fact, everything in the world is happening with the help of softwares. If you want to book a cab, you will use software. If you want to transfer money, you will use software. If you want to buy something online, or if you want to buy something, you will use a software, right? So if everything is done with the help of a software, which we normally call them as applications, what normally happens is we build a particular website. Now that's what we call them. We build a website, and in that particular website, you will be having all the services. Now, when you talk about services, what exactly it means? Now, imagine a shopping website. Example, if you go to Amazon, you get a lot of features there, right? On Amazon, you can basically search for a product. You can buy a product. You can basically add a product to a cart, and then you can buy a product. You can pay for that online. And also, as a seller, I can sell my own devices, or I can sell my own things on Amazon, because it's also a marketplace. So basically, Amazon itself is a huge software which has a lot of different services, right? Now, if you want to build this website by yourself, what you will do is you have a traditional mindset. Of course, one of the best thing about building a software nowadays is we think about creating different modules. So what you do is you break down the entire project into small parts. In fact, that's how we think, right? So if I want to build a website, I will just break down the services into small modules. I will work on one particular module. And also that's what we also suggest, right? So if you have a big team, you can divide your big team into small groups. So let's say if you have 50 people working on one big project, you can have 5 different teams of 10, or maybe 10 different teams of 5 members. And then these people will work on one particular feature, right? And that's how you can build this amazing website like Amazon or Amazon.com to buy something. Now, the thing is, the approach is actually coming from the software development field. Now, when you build a normal software, what is the tendency? So we have a software which works on a desktop. In fact, when I started my career, I started in that zone. You can just write an application which works on a particular machine, right? So what you do is you structure your entire application for one device. Now, that's what we do in the web world as well. Even if you have multiple teams, they are working on different services, they are still one package, right? So maybe in Java or in other languages, what you do is you create a package, right? You create, let's say in Java, we create a var file or a jar file. You will put all the services in this particular var file, and then you will deploy this on a cloud or on any server. The problem is you have a lot of services here on one system. So let's talk about some advantages of doing this. The advantage of doing this type of architecture, which we normally call them as monolithic application or monolithic architecture, where you have everything in one place, all the services, right? Of course, they are designed by other members. You can simply group them. You can form a particular package and you can deploy it. So the good thing is you know what is happening with the application. What are the drawbacks? There are multiple drawbacks with this type of architecture. The first one is team dependencies. So let's say if all your team, your 10 teams are working together to make all these features, they have to actually dependent on each other. They should know when you are going to go for the next release, right? So of course, with every release, you go for a version. So you have to specify, okay, I got a new feature, but let me know when I can push this feature in the product so that we can deploy the entire project. The second one is the scalability. Let's say if we talk about Amazon itself, in fact, we can take this example, or we can take this concept for multiple examples, multiple domains. But if you stick to Amazon here, let's say if there's a sale going on. Now, if you know that tomorrow there will be a huge sale, maybe for some festival, some other event, what do you think, which of the services will be needed scalability here? In the monolithic application, what happens is if you know that there's a sale going on or there will be sale happening next week, what you will do is you will scale your application in multiple systems, right? Maybe you will try to do vertical scaling by adding more servers or more RAM power, or you can do the horizontal scaling. So basically you will have the same application and having multiple instances of them. See, in terms of sale, it's not like you will get new users or you will get a lot of new users, you will get a lot of new sellers. What you will get is more searches. You will get more payments. So instead of scaling the entire application, don't you think we should be scaling only the small modules there? So that's what we want, right? We want to use this particular service. So instead of scaling the entire monolithic application, we should be able to scale that individual services. Next one, what if you have a big application and if you think we will build this application using as a one monolithic application, the thing is you have to stick to one technology. Maybe if you're using Java for the entire application, you have to stick to Java. Even if you have a new team who says, okay, I want to work on Node.js, they can't because you are building one big application, which will create one particular package, which will go to one particular server. What you can do is, if you have a different services here, you can actually create different services using different technologies, right? So that's one of the advantage we want, and that can be done with the help of microservices. So each service which I'm talking about here, they are called microservices. The advantage is, if you have 10 teams, they can divide the entire project into small services. One thing to remember here, each service here should be self-contained. They should be able to deploy it separately, and also they should be scaled separately. They should not be dependent on some other services. So each service here will be called microservices. Now, since they are microservices, we can create them in any technology we want. So one service can be done with Java, second service can be done with Node.js. And now since there are multiple services, you can scale them the way you want. Maybe if you have 10 services, I want to take this fifth and sixth service and I want, let's say, 10 instances of them. I want the second service to have 5 instances. So I can scale based on the service requirement, not for the entire application. And also, since they are separate services, even if some service goes down, it will not affect the entire application. Now, in terms of monolithic application, if you make one change, it is not working, it will crash the entire application. That's not the case with microservices. So basically, what is microservice? They are individual services which are self-contained. They can run as an individual service. And maybe let's say if I want to go to Amazon, if I say I want to search for the products, that's one service. I want to create a new account, that's one service. I want to sell a particular product, that's one service. So these are your microservices. Now everything looks good on paper, right? We are saying that microservices are great. Do we have any challenges there? The thing is, yes. Now since we have multiple services, how these services will communicate? It's not like they can't, but then it's difficult to configure them, okay? And you will be doing that only once. You have to use service discoveries, you have to use API gateway, which will stand in front of all the services. And you will be also having some resilience system in between. What if some service failed? Do we have fail support there? And creating a microservice is not just about writing code, okay? It's also about creating the architecture before you write a single line of code. How do you design your system? How do you create those services? That's also important. And if you don't design your microservices properly, ultimately you are creating a worst system of monolithic application. Now, one of the questions might be how these services communicate. So they basically uses HTTP request or response to communicate between each other. Of course, they will be having endpoints to communicate. And also we have to also think about security. Because now since you have different services, if a customer sends a request, which services you have to go to, and does that particular user has access to do that? So that's the challenges of microservices, but it's an awesome thing. Big companies, they are using microservices on big level. So finally, we are moving towards microservices. Of course, we have talked about the theory of microservice. Then we move towards building a project. Now, the project which we have built is called a quiz application, and it was a monolithic application. The reason we started with monolithic is it will make you understand how do you move a monolithic application to microservices, and also it will also help you to understand that why we have to go for microservices. The thing is, whatever application which we have built now is one big application, right? Of course, it's a small application, but imagine it's a big application. You have multiple services. Now, what we have done is we have an application which we have done. If you have not seen the video, the entire project, that's fine. I will give you a complete walkthrough somewhere in between, and then we can get started. But just to get started here, what we have is we have a quiz application, right? And in this quiz application, if you can see, we have two controllers. One is your question controller and second is a quiz controller. So let's say if you want to create a quiz. Now, of course, a quiz can have multiple questions, and then you can also select which topic you want to build a quiz on. So maybe you want to give a quiz on Java or maybe Python or maybe any other subject, doesn't matter. And also you need a way to add questions, remove questions, update questions, and also read questions, right? Now that's what we can do in the question controller. Now, since everything is in one place, in one application, imagine this application has multiple services. Now, apart from questions and quiz, let's say we also have user service where we are asking user to create an account. Or maybe we also have a payment gateway so that if someone wants to give the quiz, maybe they have to pay some amount. Or maybe we also want to give them a certificate. So we have to all those services. Now, when you do everything in one application, that's your monolithic application, right? What we want to build is, we want to build microservices. So each service which I've talked about, like question service, quiz service, user service, maybe we have certificate service. These all are individual service and they are running independently. They're not dependent on each other. Of course, if you want to give a quiz, you have to first generate questions, right? You will get the quiz from the questions, right? So that's what we want to do. So the quiz and question will communicate. And of course, quiz will also communicate with the certificate, right? Because once you complete the quiz, you have to also generate a certificate. Maybe quiz will also ask for the payment. So everything is connected here, right? So, or maybe they're connected with one big thing, which is quiz here. But the idea is we have to create small services which will run independently. Now, is it that easy to convert this project into two parts? Example, let's say we want to make sure that the question and the quiz will be separated. So there are two different microservices. Of course, you can have some more microservices, but just to keep it simple, let's say we have two microservices. And here, when you talk about the quiz service, basically it is going to use the question service. Now, what we had before in quiz is this. So basically, if you want to create a quiz, you can use a create URL, and then you can create a quiz. You can get a particular number of questions from a quiz by specifying the ID. Let's say I take different sessions. I teach Java, I teach Python, I teach, let's say, blockchain. So what I can do is for different batches, I can create different quiz. So quiz 1, quiz 2, quiz 3. Now that's for this week. Next week, again, I have to create 3 different quizzes. So that will be 4, 5, 6, right? So that's my quiz ID. So if I specify a particular ID, it will give me all the questions for that particular quiz. And also, we can also submit the quiz basically. So let's say if participants are attending this quiz and they have submitted some response, we have to calculate a score. And that's what we are doing in the quiz controller. But then if you say generate or create a quiz, you need to get questions, right? And that will be done with the help of question controller. So you can see here, the question controller has an option of getting all the questions, getting the category and add. But if you see nowhere, we are basically giving away the questions. Now that's something we have done in quiz itself, because if I jump to the quiz implementation, this will make sense more when you have seen the previous videos. So if you click on the create quiz here, so you can see this is where we are generating the questions, and that is coming from the question. That means the quiz and question are integrated tightly. These are tightly dependent components. We have to find a way to make them decouple, right? So basically we have to make sure that they are decoupled, right? Now to do that, we have to make some changes. Now what are the changes we have? Now first of all, when you talk about this create quiz, which is here, we don't want to use question DAO directly. What we want is the question controller or the question service will be separated. It will have its own database. The weird thing is, or not exactly weird, but the thing is, if you open your PG admin, because we are using Postgres database here, okay, it's asking for my password. Let me enter that and let me look at the database what we had. So if you can see, we had only one database, which is your question DB, right? And in this question DB, we had different tables. If I see the schema here, we had different tables here, right? So what we want to do is not just separate tables. Now we want to have separate databases. So question service will have everything related to question, and quiz will have everything related to quiz here. And they will have a separate database. That also means that when you go back to the code, the quiz application or the quiz service will not be having question DAO. So let's say there are two different servers, quiz service and question service. Now, when you say, hey, I want a quiz, the quiz service, which is there in other server, will request to the question service, hey, I want a few questions, right? So basically it is not in the same database. They are communicating over the network. So that's something we have to understand. Now, of course, there will be a lot of changes in this, and we'll understand those changes one by one. So let's say we have separated the two different services. Now the problem is, It is possible that if you want to scale up this application, normally what happens is when you have one big application, you scale the entire application, right? But what if you have different services? Now, in this case, if you think, hey, the quiz service will need more instance than question service, let's say, for an example. Now, in this case, you can actually replicate, or you can actually have multiple instances of a quiz service, but not question service. Let's say question service, we have 2 instances. For the quiz, we have 10 instances. Let's say I'm going to a big conference where we have 2,000 participants. Maybe I want more instances of it. So that's something we have to understand, that we can scale them individually. Also, now since we have multiple instances, they will have different IP address, right? How do you search? So let's say now we have question service, right? We have 2 instances. And quiz now have 5 or 10 instances, let's say. When a particular quiz instance is requesting to the question, which instance it will pick? So we have to also do load balancing, right, between these two, which one to select. Okay, that's one. What else about the first link? So let's say the request comes from the client, and then you have these 2 different microservices. Do you think a client knows which service to go to? Of course, we don't want client to remember all the URLs, right, for the quiz and for the questions. What we can do is we can basically send the request to one particular API gateway. Now that API gateway is like a door for all the services, and that will decide where to go. So that's one thing we need. So we basically need load balancers, we basically need API gateway. And also, we only have 2 services, right? Let's say we have 10 services. Each service will be able to call, or any service will be able to call any other service. How they know where they are? How quiz service knows where the question service is? Do we have to remember the IP address, or do we have to do something for that? And that's where we also need to go for something called a registry, where they can search each other, right? So that is called a service registry. So we need API gateway, we need a load balancer, we need a service gateway. And also, what if something goes wrong? What if their particular service is not working? So a user is requesting for a quiz, and quiz is dependent upon question. What if question is down? In that case, quiz service is basically waiting for the response, right? So we have to also do something called fail fast, right? So you have to say, hey, if it is not responding, let us know that it is not responding so that we can find alternatives, right? So you have to find a way to get the fallback. You have to also respond to the client if something goes wrong. And that all comes under this microservices. Building microservices is easy, but connecting them and achieving all these things will take time. And in the subsequent videos, we are going to implement each of them. So we'll try to implement the API gateway, we'll try to implement the service registry, and the load balancer. And also the circuit breaker, what is circuit breaker? We'll talk about that later. So now let's create our first service from this particular monolithic application. And the service which we're going to build now is your question service. So first of all, if you want to build this, of course, we have to create a new project. And in the entire series, we're not going to work with one project. We'll be having multiple projects. So every microservice is one project in IntelliJ or any IDE which you use, right? So there might be some confusion which service I'm using. So the recommended way would be to practice along the video so that you will not get confused. If you're just watching a video and then when I'm switching between the projects, you will get confused. So when you're doing it by yourself, you will know on which IDE I'm into, right? And also observe here, this is where the application name is also there. So we are into quiz application. Now, once we create a new project, this will also change. So what I will do is I will create a new project. So let me go to the same website, which is start.spring.io. And here, the project which you're going to select is Maven type. And the language is Java 3.1.1. This is the version I'm selecting. I'm not going for any snapshot version. And based on when you are watching this video, you can select any stable version. Okay, group ID, I want to make sure this is com.Telusko. And the artifact ID is, now since we are building a question service, so we'll say question service, okay? And then we can give the description here. So that's it. So we are building a question service basically here. Now, as I mentioned before, there are different services which are going to build, right? We have a quiz service and a question service. Here, we have to add some dependencies. Now, what are dependencies we need? So first of all, we need web because that's a web project. We also need Postgres because we are connecting with the database as well. We need Lombok because we don't want to write much of the code. We want to get some code from the Lombok for the data setters. And since we are connecting with database with the help of JPA, so I will also need JPA. Now, this is something which we have used before as well, right? Nothing new here. Now, what is new? The thing is, when you are building the entire project, we need 2 more dependencies. One is your open Feign. And again, I will not describe what this does at this point. We'll talk about this later. And next we need is Eureka client. Okay. Again, why do we need all those things? We'll discuss that later. At this point, just say we have those two things. And once I download the project, I will basically going to comment it. Now I'm getting it is because in future, we will need those dependencies, and instead of copying them, we can simply uncomment it, right? So at this point, just ignore it. But when you are trying this on your machine, also get this, comment it as I'm doing, and then we can get forward. Okay, now after this, we'll simply click on generate. I'm just checking if everything is good, looks good. I will click on generate. Now it will give me a project in zip format. I will simply unzip it. So unzipping done, let me go back to my IntelliJ. And here, I will open the project. So I will say open. So basically we are into that particular file now and our project, which is unzipped. You can see question service and click on open. Now this time we'll do it in a new window because I want to use the existing window as well, the existing project. So you can click on new window. Now if you're using Eclipse, in Eclipse basically you just have to import the project. In one Eclipse you can see multiple projects on the left hand side. So that's fine, whichever IDE we are using. So I will just click on the new window. In fact, I will say don't ask me again because all the project which I'm going to create will be opening in the new window. Now when we do that, this is the new window, right? Now if you can see, okay, let it load first. So basically you can see the project name here, which is question service. Now if I switch back to other project, this is quiz app. Okay, just remember, this is quiz app, this is question service. Okay, so this is monolithic. And this is the microservice. So it's downloading the dependency, which will take some time. Okay, looks like dependencies has been downloaded. If I click on Maven, there's no problem here. Everything looks clean. And then if I expand the external libraries, you can see, I think we got all the libraries required. But as I mentioned before, we don't need those two dependencies at this point, right? So I will go back to the POM file, where you have all the dependency mentioned. And I can simply comment these two things. I don't need Eureka server. I don't need open Feign at this point. So comment it out and everything else will need that. Okay. So we are just commenting it. What next? Now, of course, I can build the entire project by typing, but since we have already done that work, right? So what I will do is when you go back to your SRC and main, you can see Java is actually empty. We only have one thing here, which is the question service application. Now in this, I will need all those things. Of course, we'll make some changes to make it more like a microservices, an individual service or the independent service basically. So what I will do is I will go back to my project and you can see in this particular project, which we have done before, we had all these things, right? We have a controller in which you had a question controller, quiz controller. At this point, what I will do is I will just copy this entire stuff and paste in here. So you can see we got all the things and actually we don't need all things. So if you see controller, we don't need quiz controller in this. This is basically a microservice for question. So delete. In DAO also, we don't need quiz DAO because the moment you say quiz DAO, that means we have the same database. No, we want to use two different databases, right? And in fact, let me also do that once I delete all these things. So let me delete, we will need question wrapper. And we'll need response as well. We don't need quiz, so we'll delete that. Again, we'll discuss why do we need question wrapper and response later. And in the service, again, we don't need quiz service, so we'll delete that as well. So delete and done. Okay, so you can see we have deleted it. Of course, this project will not work because we have deleted so many things. And one more thing, since we have made the changes in the POM, remember, we have commented the things here. So we have to reload this. You have to remember, whenever you make some changes in the POM file, you need to reload your changes. And once I do that, you can see now it looks good. We don't need POM file anymore now. Let's close it. Now these are the things. Now one more thing, we need to also create a separate database for the quiz, right? Now since we are not working on quiz, we are only working with questions. So let's create the quiz database later, okay? I thought we'll create, but it doesn't make sense now. We are only working on question service. So let's only focus on question service. Now here, if you go back to your controller, of course you have all these things and we have to import the package, lengthy things, right? So now since the thing is, we have changed this name, right? The quiz app, and that's the issue. So no issue. I will quickly import everything. The reason I'm not cutting this part of the video is because I think you should know how do we import something if something is not there. Import done, question now. I don't think there is an issue or there's an issue of question of this import. So let me import the question class as well. And let me go back to question. Is it dependent on anything? Nothing. Looks good. Question wrapper, dependent on nothing. Looks good. Response, dependent on nothing. Looks good. Question service. Now it is dependent on a lot of different things. Let me remove the imports which is not making sense. And let's do the import here. Question down, question, and then if you go down, things are looking good here. Okay, one more file which we forgot to import is this, the application.properties, which is empty at this point. So what I will do is I will just go back to my previous project. Application properties we'll need all these things. So we'll copy this and paste it here. Right, so all these things we needed. This is basically for Postgres database connectivity, right? We need to mention the driver. We need to mention which database we are working with, which is QuestionDB, the Postgres username, the password for the DDL update for the database table creation, and then dialect. Okay, nothing to change here, but we'll keep it open. I don't need wrapper response at this point, so I will close them. Question also I don't need it now. Let me focus only on the controller. Now, what are the changes we need to do here? The thing is, in the earlier scenario, first, maybe I think we should first run this to check if everything is working with this settings. We just need to say get all questions. Let's see if this works. Run. Okay, yes, I need Lombok. Okay, no problem. You can see service started on 8080. So let me go back to my browser and say localhost 8080/ all questions. So it is working. You can see we got all the questions. But now we have also mentioned that we want to make this as an independent service. At this point in the earlier project, everything was mixed up, right? Everything was there in one project. But now we want to make it different. So in the question controller, we have to add some more requests. So what are the things we need? So what we will need is, I will just write comments here first. So first of all, we need to find a way to generate the quiz. The thing is, in the earlier scenario, the quiz was responsible to generate questions, right? But then it also needs access to the question database. We don't want that now. The quiz service will not be having access to the question database, which is in two different servers. So if question service needs a quiz, it is the job of your question service to generate it. So basically, quiz service will request to the question service, hey, give me questions. The question service will say, okay, let me give you the questions, and it will generate the questions. So basically, I need to have a method here called generate or create, your choice. So I can say generate. This is one thing. This one thing URL we have to work on. Next, we need to also get the question for a particular quiz. Let's say we have a quiz database, right? A quiz service, quiz database. In the quiz database, it will have its own data about the quiz, but it will not have data about the questions, right? For the questions, it has to go to the question service. So what if your quiz service says, hey, I have the quiz number, but I don't have a questions for it. Give me the questions. So maybe we have to find a way to give them the questions based on the quiz ID or based on the question ID, because we don't have the quiz ID, right, on the question database. Okay, so it should be based on the get questions, but it should be based on the quiz ID. So I'll mention the bracket on the question ID, not quiz ID, question ID. And also now we need to get this score as well. You know why we have to calculate score here? In the earlier project, we basically calculated the score in the quiz service, if you remember. If you go down, this is where we have calculated the results. Now we don't want to do that in the quiz service, because in the question service, we have all the questions. Even the right answers is there with the questions. So in that case, we need to do that here. So we'll say get score. So these three things we have to implement in the question service to make it independent. Now, how to do that? That we'll see in the next video. Okay, so basically, we need to do these three things, right? If you want to complete this, we need to say generate, get question, and get score. So let's start with generate first. Now, if you remember, in the earlier application, which was our quiz app, in this, basically, if you go back to your quiz controller, this is where we were generating the quiz, right? Now, this time we are saying that it will request, of course, this create will be there on the quiz service as well, but it will request the question service to create the quiz or to get the questions. So what we can do is, I can use something like this in my app. So here, the request will be coming for the generate. So I'll say get mapping, and the request will be coming for generate, as we mentioned before. And the method name, let's say public, is get questions for quiz. and it will return something, right? So what do we return here? Now, basically, if you remember, when we talk about quiz application or the earlier application, it was getting questions. But this time, what if we don't return questions? We just return the numbers. So that, see, anyway, all the calculations is going to happen on the question service, right? So this getting scored, getting the questions, anyway, it is happening in the question service. Then why quiz has to know about the questions? We can simply return the list of numbers, the IDs of the questions. So we are going to return response entity, but that will be specific to the list of numbers. So we can say list of integers, okay? And we are going to just return it here. But the question is, who will be getting us questions? Of course, every time you need something, you have a question service, right? So you will say, hey, question service, get questions for quiz. And then, of course, we have to pass some parameters, right? Even from the quiz service, when it is requesting to the question service, we have to basically specify some parameters here. And when you say parameter, of course, if you want to generate a quiz or if you want to give a list of questions, you just need two things. Tell me the category, the topic name, and tell me how many questions you need. So I can simply say, and this will be coming from the quiz service, right? So quiz service will request to the question service, and it will also pass these two values. So we can simply specify request param. We will need string category, and we can say category name. And here we can say request param, and this will be your number of questions. Yeah, I know things are going on different line. Maybe I can just get this here. This looks cool, right? So now we just need to pass these two values from the quiz service. Just remember that. Okay, but then we have to pass this value here as well. So I can pass category name and I can pass the number of questions. And we don't have this method. So let's create this method. So I will just right click here, or I will just click here and say create this method. Now in this method, how do you get the questions? Okay, now instead of typing the code, what we can do is, if you remember in the earlier project, when we said create a quiz, and if I click on this, this is the logic, right? This is what we wanted to do. I can simply copy this because that's what we need. Nothing fancy. Create quiz, and we are getting this. So this is the thing, right? And out of this, we just need this line because we anyway in the DAO layer, if you see in the DAO layer, so I'm into the quiz application, the monolithic application. In the DAO layer, not of this, the question DAO, we had this thing, right? We just need to get the questions for a category based on the number of questions. We just need to get this. Anyway, in our application, we have that. So what I will do is, I will go to quiz service. I just need this line of code. I can just copy this. Go back to our new application, which is the question service, and paste. That's it. This is the thing we need. Now we have to make some changes. The changes, of course, we have to pass the category name and the number of questions, right? Now in the DAO, of course, it also has a DAO here. So if you see the DAO, for the question DAO, we already have that particular method here. The difference is this time we don't want to return the questions. What we want to return is the question ID. So that will be integer. And here we don't need to return the star because star will give you everything. We just need the ID. So q.id. And with the same thing, so we'll need the category, we'll need the number. And based on that, I just need to fetch the questions. That's it. Now this will return the list of integers, right? So in the question service, it will return the list of integers. And oh, this should not string. This should be integer. I made a mistake here. This should be integer. And here also we have to say integer, right? And now it will work. And the only thing is we have to convert this into a response entity. So we'll say return new response entity. And then we have to pass two values here. The first one is questions, and the second one is the status. So we'll say status.OK, and that's it. So basically, when you say generate quiz, this is what we need to do. Okay, and now, so that's question done, generating questions done. So next we need to do something for the get questions. Now get question is post mapping, and here we'll say get questions. Now, why do we need to define this? This is very simple. This is basically if a quiz service is requesting for the questions for a particular ID, we can do that with the help of get questions. And here we'll say public. Now this will basically return the list of questions, right? So I will say response entity, and here we have to pass the list of questions. Then the thing is, we don't need to return the answer, right? Because if you see the question, it has answers as well. We don't want to return answer. What we want to return is the wrapper, because in wrapper, question wrapper, we have ID, question title, and options. We don't have answer. So what we are going to return is question wrapper, and we'll say get questions from ID. Now, since we are saying that we are going to return questions for the IDs, right? So of course we need to request for the ID as well. So from the quiz service, I'm expecting that we will get some IDs. And since it was not one ID, it is multiple IDs. So we'll say list of integers and we'll say question IDs. So basically that's what I'm getting from the quiz service, but basically. And we just need to return whatever question service returns to us. So question service dot get questions from ID. And of course we don't have this method yet. So we'll create that method. So I will say questions ID. So let me create this particular method here. Okay, so method created, let's go back to our service and you can see we have this particular method here. Now let's define it. So the thing is, for this particular IDs, we have to communicate with our database to return the IDs to you, right? So how will you do that? So it is a bit complex, so just be with me. So we don't need to return questions, right? We need to return the question wrapper. So of course we need to get the question wrapper first. I will say question wrapper. This is what we want to return. So I will say wrappers is equal to new array list. Now this is what we want to return. So here we can simply return new response entity. And then we need to pass two things. We need to pass the wrapper and the status. So I will say HTTP status dot OK, right? Now here we can't send empty, right? Of course we need to return questions based on the question ID. Now how will you get that? It's very simple. Get the IDs and get the questions out of it. So the way you can do that is, what if we can create a list of questions here, and we'll call them questions, and we need to fill this array list from the database. So based on this ID, we will fill this, and from this question we'll create a question wrapper. Okay. Now how will you connect with database to get this data? We have DAO layer, so we can use it. So what we'll do is we'll iterate between these IDs and get one question at a time. So I can say for integer ID colon question IDs. So for each question, we need to get the question first. And the way you can do that is by saying question Q is equal to, or maybe we can directly add that in the list, right? So I can say question. So whatever data you're getting from the database, you will simply add that to the list. So we can say questions dot add, but what you will add here, now this is something you need to get from the database. So you will say question DAO dot, there's a method called find by ID, which will ask you for the ID, and we got the ID. The only thing is this will return optional. So you will say get, so that you will get the value. Okay, now what we are doing is we are simply passing these values and getting data from database, and we are adding that in the questions, right? But then we don't want questions, we want wrapper, which will not have answers, right? So what we can do is we can iterate between the list again. We can say questions, question is equal to questions. And from these questions, we'll copy data into question wrapper. And for that, we'll say question wrapper is equal to new question wrapper. And then one by one, we'll convert the question into question wrapper. Not converting, but copying data. So we'll say wrapper.set ID. That's the first thing we have to set. And this will be coming from question now. So question.get ID. That's one. I just hope there should be some library to do that. I will say set question title. So we'll say question, give me title. And then wrapper.set option 1. So we'll say question.set option 1. And I can just simply copy it now. And we'll set this as, okay, that was 1. This should be 2. This should be 3. This should be 4. And this will be 2. This will be 3, and this will be 4. Okay. Now, once we have added the question, so basically we are creating one question wrapper at a time. We just need to add that to the list. So we have wrappers.add. We are adding this wrapper here. That's it. And now, once we have added it, we can simply return the value, right? So I think we have done for the get question IDs as well. There is some error somewhere. It is because of this. Okay, I think we don't have the constructor. So I will go back to question wrapper and say I need a no argument constructor. Now it looks good. Yeah, okay. Things are looking good. I don't see any problem here. Okay, so that was for the get question IDs, right? Now we need to do one more thing, which is for the get score. This is where we need to do calculation. So what I will do is, I can do it for the get score now. Now when you say get score, basically a quiz service will send the responses which a quiz service got from the client. So number of students are submitting the quiz to the quiz service. Now quiz service will send this data to the question service to get the score. And each set of responses will get one score. So single score. Basically we have to return only one score. So here we'll say get score, and I forgot to put the method name. It is public. It should return response entity. But then that will be just an integer now. We want to return a score, right? A score will be a number. And we can say get score. Now it will accept certain things, right? In fact, it only needs a list of responses. So from the quiz service, you will get a list of responses, not response entity, the list of responses which will import the package. Now what is response here? So if you say response, we only have two things here, question ID and the response. This is basically answer. So let's say if you get a question and you get 4 options, now that question will have an ID that we need. And also for that particular question, what is the option selected by the user? And once we know it, we can get the score, right? For each question, so I can say responses, right? Now how do you calculate score? We will not do that. We'll ask our service to do that. So we'll say question service dot get score by passing the responses, right? But we don't have this method, right? So let me create this method in the service, right? Okay, now how do you calculate score? Now basically we have done this code before, right? So if you go back here in the quiz service, if you can see, we do have this entire logic here, right? Now what I will do is I will just copy this logic, and of course we don't need everything, but let's copy it. So copy and paste. Okay, first of all, we don't need quiz now, right? We don't even have anything with this quiz here. We don't need list of questions. Anyway, we got responses. What we can do is, for every response, in fact, we don't need this int as well. We can remove this. We just need write. Okay, see, anyway, the response has an ID, right? So what if whatever response I'm getting, okay, so for the response ID, I need to get the question, right? So what I can do is I can say question, I just need to import the package, I think. What have I done? Okay, question. Because see, why do we need question here is because question has the answer, right? Now we can pick one question at a time. And the way you can do that is by using question DAO. And you can say, hey, question DAO, give me the question for a particular ID. So find by ID. And how will I get the ID? ID is then the response, right? So I can say response dot get ID. And for that particular ID, I need the question first. And okay, it will give me optional. So I will say get. For this particular, let's say in responses, we have two things, right? We have ID and we have answer. Now with each ID, I can get the question first because the question has something called get right answer. So here I can get this. So what we are doing is we are comparing the response with the right answer. If it is same, then we are saying plus plus. Otherwise, we don't need to increment. Right? Simple stuff. Okay, and that's how basically you calculate this code. Okay, now if you look here for the entire question controller, we have done with this methods. So this is basically what we have built our question service. Now this question service is going to be used by the quiz service. Now how we are going to do that we'll see in the next video. So basically in the last video, we have talked about the question service, right? In this, we were able to add questions, delete question. Of course, we have not tested it. That's what we are going to do in this video. But we have created all these endpoints. We got all questions, we got category, add, generate, then we got get questions. And this is basically if someone is asking for a particular question based on some question IDs. So let's say if you pass 5, 8, 12, and 13. So these are the question IDs you're passing. So what it will return is a list of questions, right? And just questions, not answers. And that's why we are using a question wrapper here. And then of course we have also added the get score, which will calculate this code. But the thing is we have not tested it, right? So that's what we want to do here. We want to test this particular application. And also, since we're talking about microservice, we will be creating multiple instances of it, right? See, the thing is, in the world of microservices, if you want to scale a particular service, you can do that. So example, in your application, you have 5 microservices. And if you want to scale, let's say 1 or 2, you can scale them individually, right? And that's what we're going to do here. Maybe I want to run 2 instances of this question service, right? Or maybe 3 instances. So how do we do that? How do we run multiple instances? That's what we'll check. Okay, so first of all, let's run this code and let's see what happens. So it's already running. So what I will do is I will just restart so that if in case if it is not running on your machine, you can restart it. And one thing to observe, if you see here in the command line, it says it is 8080. So the port number where you are running this particular instance is 8080. Okay. And now I will go back to the Postman. So I was doing some testing before this, before recording. So I got this particular links here. So I will show you one by one. So let's say I want to get all the questions. Of course, you can get the questions from the browser as well. So if I go back to Chrome, so it is 8080. And then the URL is question/all questions. Why this URL? If you go back to your IDE, if you can see, we are saying question and then slash all questions. It will return all the questions. I just want to test that. Enter, and you can see we got all the questions here. Okay, and now I will go back to Postman for testing other things. Of course, I can do all questions from here as well. So I can send a GET request. So this is the GET request, and if you don't have this, of course you will not have. So you can just enter this. You can send a GET request and mention this URL, which is http://localhost:8080/question.all questions. And then when you click on send, you can see you will get all the questions here. That's what we wanted, right? We got all the questions, the same thing which we got in the browser, we got here. Of course, we are also sending the status code, which is 200 OK, and that's what you can see here. Okay, that's the first request, right? But if you see your code, we have done some more URLs. Let's not talk about category at this point, or maybe we can do that, right? So we can say, I want category Java, right? So this is a URL we want to enter. And when you say send, you can see we get all the Java questions now. Right, so these are the GET request. How about the POST request? I don't want to add questions. Let's say I want to generate a particular quiz. So we can do that. But again, for that, we need to mention these two things. We'll do that later. At least we can test GET questions, right? This is important. Now, if you're sending a list of questions or question IDs, I want to get the questions of it. So what we can do is we can send the GET questions. And important thing is it's a POST thing, right? It's a POST method. So if you see, we are doing POST mapping. So we have to send a POST method. And then here we have to say question/get questions. But then you have to also pass a body, right? The list of IDs. So if you see in the code, we are accepting a list of integers here. So you have to pass them. So basically we have to pass a JSON in the array format. So we'll go to body, and let's say I'm passing these questions here, 2, 4, 7, 9, 5. You can send any numbers. You have to just make sure that you are sending these questions, so I'm sending 2, 4 is here, and 7 and 9. So we got 7, 9, and 5 as well. So basically, remember this thing, static exception. This is what we are trying to fetch, and also at least once. Remember these terms, and 2 strings. Okay, these are the questions we will be getting. So what I will do is I will just go back there and send the request, and you can see we got this. So question number 5 was about static, and we got it. Question number 4 is here. 4 was about exception, and we got it. 9 was about 2 string, we got it. 5 was about static, we got it. Okay, so you can see we got all the questions which we mentioned in these numbers. Of course, if you change these numbers, let's say I'm fetching 3 as well. So 2, 3. So whatever ID you mention, it will simply give those questions to you. So 3 talks about uninitialized Boolean variables. Let's see if 3 is that question. Yes, so according to our test, it is fetching only those questions which I mentioned. So yeah, these things are working. We can also check for get score. But if you talk about get score, and if you go back to the IDE, so what we are doing in get score is we are sending this URL, which is get score, and this is a post mapping thing to remember. And then we are specifying the list of responses. Now, what a response basically? Response has 2 things. One is ID, and second is the answer. This is not the actual answer. This is the answer given by a participant, right? Or whoever is doing whoever is playing the quiz. So this will be ID and any option which they are selecting. We just need to confirm, right? But how will you send this data? Of course, from the question controller, we have to, when we are requesting for get score, we have to pass these responses. So basically, we have to send the JSON of all the responses, list of JSON, right? So I will go to get score here. And this is the URL, right? So get score, question/get score. Remember, we are working with the question service now. And that's why everywhere you will see question/get score. And here in the post, so this has to be post because we have to submit data, right? We have to send the questions, or sorry, the responses. Now, how will you send data? Of course, you have to go to body, and this is a response. So you can type it manually by watching it. It's very simple. You just create an array because we are sending a list, and in each element you have a JSON response, right? So this is the ID of the question, and this is the answer which a user is sending. So this is the ID, this is the answer, this is the ID, this is the answer, and then on the back end it will get calculated. So randomly I'm assigning some values. In fact, we have done the same thing when we created the monolithic application, so I'm using the same data. And when you say send, you will get a response in terms of score here. If you can see, we got 3. Okay, so it says visualize. What is visualize option? Never tried it. Anyway, so we can see we got pretty. It says it is 3, and that's what we wanted, right? Of course, if you, out of these 5 questions, I guess there are 5 responses, 3 are correct, and you can also verify that. Let's say if I make one more mistake, let's say it is, I'm not sure if it was 4 or 5, I don't know the answer even. Let's say for 19, what is the response? For 19, we can check. For 19, the response is, the correct answer is 3, okay? And initially it was 4, so it was a wrong answer. Let's make it right. So it should be scored, should be 4 now. Send, and you can see we got 4. So this is working, right? And that's how we basically test it. So all the URL, I mean, most of the URL are working. We have not tested for generate. We'll likely do that when we are doing the quiz service. Not a good idea, but I know it will work. If not, let's do debugging later. Okay. So we were able to do that with one instance, right? And the instance is at 8080, which is 8080. Now it may happen that you have multiple instances, and every instance will have a different port number. How will you do that? How will you get a different port number? So what you mention here in the application.properties, and you can see by default we have not specified any port number. So default port number is 8080. If you want a different port number, you can specify here. But then I want 8080 as well, and then the new instance will be having some different port number. The way you can do that, you can run multiple instances. You can just go here on top in IntelliJ. If you're using Eclipse, you will see something like a configuration, run configuration. You can select that, and you will see an option of edit config. So just click on edit config here. And this is the by default config you have. So every time you build an application in IntelliJ or any IDE, you will get a default config. We want this, but with some changes. So what I will do is, I will just copy this. In fact, you can see there's a button here, copy configuration. Click this. It will create a new configuration for you. Of course, it has a different name. What we can do is we can also customize this, I think. Yeah, you can just say instance 8081. So we are just running a different port number now. But then just by changing a port number here will not work. This is just a name. If you really want to change the port number, you need to go to the modify options, and you will also see these options in IntelliJ as VM options. So when you click on modify option, you will see add VM options. You will see the same thing in IntelliJ, but not in this, also in Eclipse, but not in this format. It will have a tab, the VM options. Just click on that and mention your option here. So the option is, you have to say D and server.port. So this is basically how you set it. And you say equal to 8081. So now what you're doing is, you're specifying my new server port number. Or server port number for this configuration is 8081. And when you say apply, OK, now you will see 2 options here. One is already running, right? And you can run the other one as well. So yeah, so this is by default 8080. This is 8081. You can click on run now. It will launch one more instance. So in total, you will get 2 instances of the same service. You can see this particular service is running on 8080. This one is running on 8081, right? So what you can do is you can go back to your browser. So you can say this is running on 8080, and I can just copy this URL. First try with something which is not there. So let's say 8082 is not there. So that's what you will get. But if you try with 8081, enter, you can see we got the data. So this data is coming from different instance. This is coming from different instance, right? And if you refresh, both are into running state. So we got 2 instances. Of course, you can run multiple instances, and you can shut down one of the instances. Let's say I'm shutting down the 8080 now, and 8081 is working. So if I refresh this, you can see 8080 is shut down now. 8081, it is still running. So that's how basically you can play with multiple instances. Now, once we have ran this, everything is working. What if you have a quiz service? Now, of course, once we build a quiz service, it will run on one instance. Let's say some other port number, let's say 8090. That's a port number we'll go for. And when you're sending a request from the quiz service to the question service, and if you have multiple instances, if you have only one instance, though, there is no issue, right? What if you have multiple instances? Which one it will select? So that's what we want to do, right? That's the experiment we are going to do with this microservices tutorial. So that's it from this video. In the next video, let's try to build the quiz service. Now, once we have completed the question service, now let's build our second microservice, which is your quiz service. So we are expecting that when a client sends a request, client will basically interact with the quiz service, not with the question service. And then the quiz service will interact with the question service. So basically, we have two microservices interacting so that they can share data. Okay, that's the entire idea here. So we have done with the question service. Of course, we'll make some changes there to make it more effective. But at this point, for us, question service ready, it is working. Let's focus on the quiz service. Now, what are we expecting in quiz service? Of course, we need three things. The first one is, see, we are not doing any admin or user login here. It's just that imagine when you expand this application, if you want to make it big, you also need the admin service or the normal user. But at this point, let's say we have three things. Create. Of course, the admin will create it, but we are not checking that. So it's create, quiz. Next is what if participants wants to create, they play the quiz, right? Or they want to submit the answers. Now, in this case, we have to create a method using which you can get the questions for a particular quiz. So let's say tomorrow I have a session. And after this session, I want to start the quiz so that people can play. But then I have to create the quiz today, right? So I will use create quiz. And then tomorrow, when I want to play the quiz, I will simply call a method called get with a quiz number, because of course we can have multiple quiz. So I can specify the ID. So we have to say get / the numbers. And then the third one is to get the score. So of course, as a participant, they want to know their score. So we just need these three, right? But to do that, we have to create a new project. This is a new microservice, so we have to create a new project. So what I will do here is I will go to our favorite website, which is start.spring.io. And this is where you can see we have, again, we have done this before, so we'll do that quickly. So we basically need a Maven project for Java. And this is the version we are working with, 3.11 or 3.1.1. And then we have to mention the group ID. So till this point, we are working with com.telusko, so let's stick to it. And then the artifact ID. I will say this is a quiz service. Okay. So before this, we have worked with the question service. Now we are working with quiz service. Okay, looks cool. I want a packaging as jar. The Java version I have is 17. And then now it's time to add the dependencies. Now, basically, we'll need the same dependencies which we have used earlier. So of course, we need web. That's one. Then we need data JPA because we are interacting with the database. Next we need is Postgres because the database is Postgres. Of course, you can use the in-memory database as well, but at this point we are using Postgres. In fact, in the entire project, we are using Postgres. So let's stick to it. And apart from this, to reduce your code, we need Lombok. So basically, this is the thing we need, right? Apart from this, we need two more dependencies, which we have done in the question service as well. One is your Open Feign. And next is your Eureka client. So basically this we need these two. At this point, again, I will not explain what these two are. Once our question service is ready or quiz service is ready, then using this will make much more sense. So I'm generating it, but then I will comment it before we even start coding. So looks good. I will just download this. So let's click on generate. And you can see our quiz service is downloaded. So we have to unzip it first. That's the first step. Now, once the unzipping is done, let's open that in the IntelliJ. So I'll go back to my IntelliJ and you can see this is your monolith application. This is your question service. And we have talked about this before, right? Whenever you get confused which window I am into, so just focus on this particular thing, which is quiz app or question service. So I will open a project now. So I will say open and we need to go to downloads, quiz service, open. Now this is the new project which we got and it is indexing. It will take some time. Okay, I think the external jar files have been downloaded and indexing has been done. So if I open this, of course, you will get this particular files, which is by default. In the POM file, you can see we got all these dependencies. At this point, I don't need this too, so I will just comment them. So comment, save, and every time you make some changes in your POM file, you have to make sure that you are reloading your Maven dependencies and done. No problem here. So that's done with the POM XML. Let's go back. And if you can see SRC main, we have this file, which is quiz service application, nothing fancy here, just a simple Spring application. And in the resource, we have application.properties, which is empty at this point. We'll fill this up. And then nothing much. So we want to basically build a quiz service, right? Now, we don't want to build this from scratch. We have done that in the monolithic application. So I can simply go back to my monolithic application, which is quiz app. And what are the things we need from here? So we basically need this controller, but we don't. Okay, so what I will do is I will just try to copy everything and then we'll make the changes. Anyway, we need these files, right? We don't need all, but we need some. So I will just go back here to my quiz service and paste inside this. So I will say paste, and you can see it will download, it will get everything, not download, it will get everything here. And then we have to also make sure that we are updating your application.properties. So I will go back here. We do need all this data. So I will just copy this and paste it here and done. So these are the things we need, right? Let me just close this one. Anything specific? Yeah. There's one change here. So basically, we don't need to work with the question database now. So we have two different microservices, right? So question service will interact with the question DB, and the quiz service will interact with the quiz DB. So here, I want to work with the quiz DB. We have not created this till now. We'll do that. Okay, so let's do that first. So open your pgadmin. Okay, so pgadmin is asking for the password. Let me just do that. And okay, so let's expand the servers. And here we got Postgres. If you can see, we have question DB. Now this time what we need is the quiz DB. So what I will do here is I will click here and say, hey, I want to create a new database. And this time the name is quiz DB. So let's use that and click on save. So you can see we got our quiz DB here. Okay, and whatever tables you want to create, of course, we need a quiz table. So that will be generated automatically because that's the setting we have done. So at this point, you can see we don't have any table. But if you go back to IntelliJ, so if you can see, we are saying update. So it will create tables for us if we don't have it. But based on what? So we have to make some changes in the code. First of all, in the controller, since we have copied everything, we don't need question controller because that's a part of the question service. So we can delete this. Next, do we need DAO? Yes, we need quiz DAO because we need to interact with the quiz database. We don't need question DAO. What about the service? In service, also the same thing. We don't need question service. Let's delete that. In the model, basically we need all. The reason being, see, the quiz makes sense is because we are generating a quiz and these are the things we have there. We'll make some changes here. I think there are some changes. We need question. Reason is, see, in the question service, we do have question, right? And that perfectly makes sense there. But in the quiz as well, when you are interacting with a question service, and if question service gives you a question, where you will store it. In fact, I think this is optional. So let's keep it now. And actually, we don't need question. What we need is question wrapper. Why quiz need to know about the answers, right? So that is there in the question. So we don't need this. But let's keep it there for some time and then later on we delete it. We do need responses is because when a client is submitting the quiz, the client will send the data in the response format. So you have to accept that as well. And nothing much. These are the files we need and we'll make some changes. Okay. So basically in the quiz controller, what are things we have? The same thing, nothing changes here, right? We need to create the quiz for sure. We need to get the questions for sure. We need to calculate, right? These are the things are there. So what are the changes here? Nothing much. Of course, we have to do a lot of changes in this service, which is your quiz service, because this time things are going to change here because not everything is coming from database of the question service, right? Or the question DB. Basically, we have our own database. And a question or the quiz service basically cannot interact with the question database. We have to do that with the help of question service. So how will we interact with this tool? So let's try to understand that in step by step. So we'll do that in multiple sections. So here, let's try to do that in the next video. So let's fix the application because we have copied the code from the existing service or existing application, the monolithic application I'm talking about. So this is where we have copied the code, right? So what I will do is I will go back to my quiz service. And for me also, I'm finding it difficult to understand which project I'm working on. So I have to look here for the quiz service. So that will be complex anyway. So the first thing we'll do is if you look at the controller, let's solve this first. The problem we have here is the project name, right? So in the earlier one, the project name was quiz app. So that's the issue. So let's delete this. And let's quickly import the things we need. So this is coming from the quiz service. And here also question wrapper, we need that. Nothing much here. Let's go back to the quiz service And here also, let's get rid of all this unwanted imports. Let's say quiz DAO, question DAO. Okay, we don't need question DAO, right? So this will not be used. Let's remove it. In fact, I will not remove it. I will just comment it because there are certain things which is dependent on this. And you can see the entire stuff here is dependent on that. So what I will do is I will just comment this entire section because we need to change this now. The reason being, in this particular create quiz, when we were doing it, it was using a question DAO. We don't do that now. I mean, we can't do that now because we don't have a question database with the quiz service. Okay, so we'll saw that. And then let's import the question wrapper. Let's import the quiz. Let's import the question. In fact, this is also going to change. We are not going to, so even this is basically connecting with the question DAO, and this will create issue later. So we'll resolve that later. Let's say responses. This is need to be imported. Here, quiz DAO is interacting. Okay. So that's one. And next we need to also change our DAO. So if I go to quiz DAO, any import issues here? Yes, there is an issue. Let me fix that. This is not needed now. Cool. Let's go back to service. Everything looks clean in service. Let's go to controller. Here, we forgot to import the responses. Let's do that. Okay, so we have got rid of all the errors, but still it will not work. First of all, even before to make it work, we'll make some minor changes. See, here, when you talk about the quiz, create quiz, we are passing 3 values, right? So don't you think instead of accepting 3 values, we should accept one object, which will be easier to handle? Something like this. Let's say request body. And let's create an object of quiz, maybe DTO for the data transfer object. And we'll say this is quiz DTO. We don't have this class yet, but if you have this class, what we can do is let's create this class here. So let's create a class quiz DTO. This is just to have those 3 values together. So what are things we need? So we need a category name, then we need a number of questions, and also we need title. So we need these 3, and I don't want to create getter status for this. I will simply say data. This will do our job. Okay, this looks cool, nothing fancy. And where do I want my quiz DTO? I want this in model because this is just a model, right? So let's keep it there. And now we are accepting one value. But while sending it, I will send it individually. So I will say quiz DTO dot get category name, quiz DTO dot get number of questions, and here we have to send title. So I will say quiz DTO dot get title. Okay, so that's the thing we need there. Nothing fancy. Okay, so we have resolved about the quiz, the create quiz. But again, this create quiz is calling create quiz of service, and we need to make some changes here. Before that, I will also make sure. Let me just check what are things we need here. So when you say, okay, let's try to solve this create quiz problem only. Let's focus only on one thing. So here, when you say create quiz with this, things are looking good. No problem with that. And since we don't need questions, let me also remove that. So we don't need these questions anymore. So we can delete that. It will create a table for us. We don't need that table. Okay, so let's get back to our service. And I think this is where we were using question, right? So at this point, we'll comment the entire section here. In fact, let's comment the entire method. But if I comment the entire method, it will create issue. So we need to return this, right? So I will comment entire stuff except this line because we just need to get rid of errors, right? So this should work. And here also, I will comment the entire part except this, right? So this will work. See, what we want to focus now is only on one thing, right? Which is create quiz. So when a client is saying, so the client will be admin. When an admin says create a quiz, it will send the request to or it will call the quiz service, and this is where we have to code, right? So let's try to understand how do we create a quiz. Let's understand what are the changes here. This will be tricky now. The changes is when you say create quiz, the problem is when you say create quiz, initially we were asking the question DAO, which is interacting with the question database to basically create a question. But this time we have mentioned, right? We have a separate service. So this need to interact with the question service. Now that will be tricky. So our quiz service need to interact with the question service to get the question. And also, this time we are not getting actual questions. What we are going to get is the list of integers. Now why list of integers? Because we don't want to store the question data. We just want the ID. So when you say create a quiz, let's take 5 questions from the Java concept, and we don't need the questions. We just need the numbers. So ID 5, 12, something like that will be the questions, right? So here I will say the list of integers. I want that. But the problem is this line here will not work. We need to change it. Now, change to what? Basically, we need to call the method of a question service. So if you go back to question service, and if you look at the controller, this is what we need to call. We need to call this method, which is get questions for quiz. How will you call this? How will you call? In fact, you can't call a method. What you call is a generate method. This is a request, right? So from the quiz service, we have to send a request. So let's go to quiz service. So here, this line will not work. So let me just write in comment. We basically need to call. So call the generate URL. So when you say generate URL, what is a URL? So if you go back to your question service, if you remember, we were running this multiple instance, right? So let me just run this service once just to show you how this looks like. So if I go back to the question service application, just run this, and by default it will run only on one port now, which is 8080. And we have also talked about this. If you want to run multiple instances, we can change the port number. You can see here we have 8081 here, but at this point we have only one, right? And if you want to say generate, the URL is actually, it's on the same machine. So I have to say http://localhost:8080/generate. Okay, so how do you send a request from one microservice to other microservice? So basically from the quiz service, we have to send a request to the question microservice. And for this, we have to use something called a REST template. So there's a concept called REST template. How REST template works is you can write some code here. So basically REST template is an object inside this. So if I can show you that, it's a class basically. So you can see REST template is there it's a part of Spring Framework. So using REST template, it has certain methods which we can use to send a request, right? So it will send the request to the other server. So you can see it has so many methods to do that. So we have to send a request to the question service. Now, the URL which I mentioned before is http://localhost:8080. And then we have to mention the URL, which is question/generate, right? This is a URL we have to specify. And you will say, okay, this is good. So using REST template, I can hit this URL and everything is good. Not exactly. The problem is here we are mentioning localhost. That means we are saying that it's in the same machine. But what if you have in some other machine? Okay, you will say, okay, we can use an IP address. But then if you understand microservices properly, we are not sure where we are running the instance, right? So I don't want to depend on the IP address. Next, I don't want to hardcode the port number here. How do I know on which port it is running? Right? So we don't know these values. At this point, we are at development stage, we can do that. But when you are into production, you don't know these values. So how do you solve this problem? And that's where we have to introduce some new services. Now, this is where this is the first time we are basically interacting between two different services. And if they want to interact, we need two things. The first one we need is a Feign client. Now, basically, what is Feign? Feign is almost same as your HTTP web request. The difference is it provides you a declarative way of requesting the other service. Okay, so you don't have to hard code all the values. You don't have to use something REST template where you specify everything. It will help you to declare what you want and what are the APIs you want to expose. I mean, what are the API you want to hit? So we'll see that. The next we need is a service discovery. Okay, now this will be interesting is because if you try to understand, the quiz service is trying to search for the question service. So that means the question service need to be discoverable. So we have to discover it. How will you discover? And that's something we have to solve, right? And let's understand how do you discover. So to do that, we have to use some server using which you can discover a particular API or a particular microservice. And there are multiple options. One of the famous one is Eureka. So it is from Netflix, which is Netflix Eureka. So we need two things. We need a Eureka server, and all the microservices, they have to register themselves to the Eureka server. And then one microservice can search another microservice from the Eureka server using Eureka client. So every microservice which want to search will also be having Eureka client. So they will search basically. And so by doing this, we are solving a problem of IP address and port number. We don't need to mention that. And with the help of Feign, you can actually request directly to the service with the service name. Sometimes we also call them as a naming server, right? That also makes sense because every service will have a name now. We don't have to depend upon the IP address and the port number. So how do you work with Eureka client? How do you work with Eureka server? Now that's what, so even before we solve this, we need to solve that, okay? So again, I will just comment this so that it will work and we'll remove this. So even before we continue with this, we have to get our Eureka server, Eureka client, and the open Feign. So now let's understand how do you run a Eureka server. So basically we want to have something where different microservices will register themselves, and then of course they can also search about each other. So let's say we have 10 microservices, and then if one microservice wants to connect with another microservice, how will they search? So what we are going to do is we will create a server, a service discovery server, and then every client here will register itself. So they become a client, and then we have a server. So which server we are going to use? There are multiple options, but then one of the most famous and common one is Netflix Eureka server. So what we are going to do is we will create a Eureka server. Now this is not that complex. If you're thinking, hey, we have to write a lot of lines of code, just follow me. In few minutes, I will tell you how to create a Eureka server. So the first thing is you have to create a project. So you have to go to start.spring.io, and here you have to select Maven project and Java. Of course, you can go for Gradle as well. That's your choice. So we can see we are Java, and then this is a version, and the group ID which we are following here is Telusko, and the artifact ID. And let's say I'm saying this is my service registry. Okay. So this is my server basically, and then I want this to be jar and 17 version. Now, what are dependencies we have to add? Only two dependencies basically. The first one is we want to run this project, so we'll say this is web, and the second one is we need to create a Eureka server. So if you can see, we have an option of Eureka server here. Just select that. So this is basically a Spring Cloud discovery. And that's it. We just need these two things and click on generate. And you can see we got our project. So let me just open this and unzip it. So unzipping done. Let me open this project using IntelliJ IDEA. So I'm opening this. These are the projects we are working with. We got two microservices, question service, and the quiz service, right? Now, the idea was when a quiz service want to create a quiz, it will use the question service. So there are two different services, right? And in order to search for the question service, we will need a Eureka server. So basically, a question service will register itself to Eureka server, and then a quiz service will be able to search it, right? So let me open that project now, the Eureka server project. So I will say open, downloads, service registry, open, and now we are opening our Eureka server project. So it will take some time for the dependencies, and okay, still doing it. So let's wait for that. So by the time it is downloading the dependencies, let me open the project, and you can see the POM file. We have mentioned two things here. We need a web project, and also we need a Eureka server. So both things are there. Let me close this. And if you go to SRC, you can see we have a service registry application. And then if you go to resource, we have application properties. So basically now, in order to make it work, we need to change two things, the application properties and the main application, right? Now, if you want to enable the Eureka server, once you got dependency, that's your first step. So you have to add the dependency. The second step is you have to put an annotation here called enable Eureka server. That's it. So simple, right? So just by doing this, we are enabling the Eureka server. But we have to write some configuration. One of the things is what is the name of this Eureka server? In fact, going forward, we'll also name our services. Example, if you go back to your, let's say question service, and in this, if you open your application.properties, you have to also mention the name of this particular service. So when you have multiple microservices, it's important to have a good name for it, right? So that you can search it. So we don't have a name yet. We'll do that later. But at this point, what I will do is I will just go back to my service registry, and let's make some changes here. The first thing, you have to mention the name. You have to mention the port number it is going to run. So let's do that first. So it is spring.application.name. So this is a property, and the value I'm going to set here is service registry. Okay, that's the first thing. The next thing we have to mention is a port number where this particular server will run. So it says server.port. Even if you don't mention, by default, Eureka server runs on this server, which is 8761. Now, apart from this, we have to set three more properties. The reason being, When you talk about a client, a Eureka client going to register itself to the Eureka server, right? So let's say we have three things here. We got a Eureka server. We got two clients here, which is the quiz service and the question service. Of course, these two services, the quiz and question, they are going to register themselves to the Eureka server. But what about the Eureka server? Do we want to register itself? Of course not, right? Eureka server should not be registering itself. And also, we also don't want to fetch the registry. So we'll make that false. And we also set the host name for it. So let's say to do that, we have to say eureka.instance.host name, and the host name is localhost. The next thing we have to mention is about the fetch registry, and we'll make this false. And also, I don't want it to register itself, so I will say register with Eureka false. Okay, so you have to mention these three things as well. So we don't want to register itself, and then we don't want to fetch registry as well. And then we are specifying the host name, which is localhost. So that's it. We are registered. Now we also have a port number, and this will make your Eureka server work. So let me try this. What I will do is I will just run this project. I hope this will work. So yeah, so it says it started, but which port number? So you can say it is starting on port number 876. And anyway, default was that, even if you don't mention. So how do I verify? So I can just simply go to my browser and just mention localhost :8761, and this is your Eureka server running. So you can see it says Spring Eureka. But if you see here, this is important for us. Instance currently registered with Eureka. At this point, we don't have any microservice which has registered itself to Eureka server. They're not even running, right? So how do we make it connected? How do we make it work? So that's what we are going to see now. So let's go back to our IntelliJ. And here, if you see, this is running, right? We don't have to make any changes here. But the changes we are going to make is in the question service. So let's run question service, because the quiz service will not run because we have not done the changes yet. So let's run the question service and see if this works. Now, first of all, even if you run this, it will not register. Let me just show you that once. So I will just run this code. It will take some time to load, and you can see it is running on 8080 port number. But if I go back to Eureka server, you can see it is not registered. Even if I refresh, it's not registered. So how do we do that? So the first thing you do is you go to your POM file. If you remember, when we were creating this project, we have added two more dependencies. One is your Eureka server or Eureka client, and second is your OpenFeign. So we're not using OpenFeign at this point. We are using the Eureka client. So let's uncomment this, and it will take some time to load it. So refresh. So you can say loading done. Now, this particular project, which is our question service, we have added a Eureka client. That's the first change you have to make. Let's restart and let's see if that works. Again, sometimes we learn from trial error, right? There's no problem. You can see this is important. This is the discovery client, right? So we have done this. So registration status is okay, or it's in good status. Let's refresh this and see. Okay, can you see that? We got it. We got one application registered. Now, which is this application? We don't have any idea. And actually, we know because we have run the question service. But what's the name of it? We want a good name for it, right? So what I will do is I will go back to my application.properties. And here, I will say spring.application.name. I will say this is my question service. And save this. Restart and go back here. Let's refresh. And you can see we got it. So we got question service registered. And the beauty is, if you run this with a multiple instance, we have only one instance now. What I will do is I will just go to the configuration. Remember, we have also ran this with a different port number. Let's run that one. So now we are basically trying to run two instances of question service. And if you go back here and if you refresh, can you see that we got two instances? And we also specify here. So this is on port number 8081. The first service is on default port number, which is 8080. So yeah, that's how thing works. It's awesome. So we got two connections here. And now basically your quiz service should be able to find it. But again, the problem is, even if your quiz service, let's go back to our quiz service and let's see what's wrong there. I know we are working with multiple projects. So at this point, we are currently shuffling between three projects: the quiz project, the question service, the quiz service, the question service, and the service registry. So if you go to your quiz service, we want to say that this particular create quiz is going to search about question service, right? And then we mentioned if you can register yourself to Eureka server, you can search it. But how are you going to do that? How do I request? And that's where there's a concept of Feign. So now we basically know how to run the Eureka server. And if you can see here, we have our Eureka server running, and then we have ran only one particular project, which is your question service. But then we are running two instances here. One on port number 8081, and second is your default port number, right? And then we have also made sure that the service name is this, which is question service, right? Now what I will do is I will go back to my quiz service here. So if you can see, we are into question service. Let's go back to our quiz service. Now this is where we were running the project, right? So if you go back here, in fact, we are not running the project, we are making the changes. And the problem here, when we say create quiz, I want to get the questions from the question service, right? So we want the communication between these two. So the first step is done. Now we got a Eureka server. So basically these services can search about each other. In fact, the quiz service can search question service. Vice versa is not possible is because, we are not doing it yet, is because the quiz service, we have not enabled the Eureka client. Okay, so it is not registering itself. But we'll do that in some time. But if you go back to your quiz service, this is what we were doing before, and now we want to use the question service. Now to achieve that, we need to use some REST template. We have talked about this before, right? Because how will you send requests to the question service? So we can use REST template, but then for that you have to mention the IP address, port number, and all the other stuff. What if you can use some shortcut way to search the service? Now, one of the shortcut is to use Feign. So there's a concept of open Feign or the Feign, which is a client which you can use here. Now, what Feign says is, instead of you handling everything, all the IP address and port number, or all the configuration, you tell me which service you want to connect to. I will connect it for you. Okay, that sounds good, right? So the way you can do that is, first of all, you need to create a Feign interface. Now I will do that in the general package. Of course, you can make it some in other packages. Let me just create a package here, and I will name this package as Feign. Okay, and inside this, I want to create a file. Now, this is a file which helps you to connect your quiz service to the question service. Now, if you try to understand what are the things we want to use from the question service, only three things, three particular methods. So basically, we want to generate the questions. Second, we need to get the questions for a particular ID. And the third one is get score. We just need to call those three methods, right? All the other methods which are there in the question service will be used only for that service. But then between the quiz and the question service, I want these three methods. So what I will do is I will create a simple interface, and the point to remember is we need to create the interface. So the interface name, you can have anything, and let's say this is the quiz interface. And now how do you make sure that you have Feign here? So you have to use an annotation, which is the Feign client. But the problem is, you can see it is not importing is because we don't have the dependency yet. So what you can do is you can just go to your XML file, and this is where you need to uncomment this part. So this part need to be uncomment. And also what we'll do is we'll set the Eureka client ready for this. Anyway, we are making the changes, right? So let's enable Eureka client and the Feign both. And this is done. So you can see now Feign package is there. So now if I go back here and if I say control space, you can see we got the package. Let's import that. That's the first step. In fact, the second step. The first step is to add the dependency. The second step is to add this annotation here. Now, in this annotation, you have to mention which service you are connecting to. So basically, this Feign client here will, we have to mention which client or what's the name of your service. Now, the name of the service is mentioned in the Eureka server. So if you can see in the Eureka server, the name is question service, right? This is what we want to use here. So in double quotes, I can mention question service. In fact, everything should be in caps. So that's question service. And once we have done that, the next thing you have to mention is those three methods. Of course, right? When you say a particular quiz service need to access the question service, we need to mention which services we are going to access or which methods we are going to call. Now, how will you get those three methods? It's very simple. What you can do is you can just go back to your question service, and these are the three methods. So again, all the other methods we don't want. We just need to focus on these three methods, right? So what I can do is I can get these things copied from here and go back to our quiz service and paste it here. Now, of course, this is an interface, right? And we are defining methods. We don't want it. The actual definition will be there in the question service. Here, we just need to declare them. Not defining, just declare. Same goes here. We are not defining the methods. We are just saying that these are the methods which we have, which you can use. Okay, and then this part as well. Let me remove this part and put a semicolon. And then we have to import the packages as well for the question wrapper and for responses. So that's it. These are the only change you need now, right? So now by doing this, we are basically saying, hey, quiz service, if you want to connect to the question service, I will help you. So Feign basically searches for this thing. It will help you to connect to the question service. But also, if you want to use this particular feature in your question service, we need to create this object. We need to use this reference. So where do I use this? Let's go back to quiz service. And here, we don't want the question DAO, right? But we need the quiz interface. So quiz interface, and we'll say, let's say quiz interface. And we have to auto-wire this. Okay. Now, whatever call you want to make. So initially we were thinking we will be using REST template to make the calls to the question service. We're not going to use REST template. We are going to use this quiz interface to make the calls. Now, how do you make the call? So let me remove all these things here. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get the questions, right? And we don't want actual questions. We just need IDs, if you remember. So what we can do is we can create a list of integers and we'll name this as questions. And then we can use the quiz interface to call a method. But which method? So if you go back to your question service and who is responsible to give you the questions, so you can see this method, which is get questions for quiz, is returning you a list of integers, right? Now this is what we want. So let's go back to our quiz service and we can say quiz interface dot get questions for quiz. And we have to pass two things, the category and the number of questions. Right? That's what we are getting from here. And that's it. What you will get is list of integers. Okay, but the problem is it will give you response entity, right? We want only the list of integers. So we can say get body. So basically in the question service, we have mentioned that we are going to return the response entity. So what we'll do is we'll just say get body so that you will get list of questions. And then based on these questions, let's create a quiz. And for that, I will create a quiz object. I will say quiz. Let me import the package. Of course, the same thing we have done before as well. And if you remember, I've deleted that code, so we have to write it once again. So let's set the title for this because that is something we got from the user. And the title goes as title. Now it's time to set the questions. So I will say quiz.set questions. Now set questions will accept the list of integers, right? So I can simply say questions. We just need to make one change, which we forgot to do before, is in the quiz. Now, when we are saving the questions, we are not saving the actual questions. This is something we need to change. We are basically saving the integers, right? So the change we have to make is not questions. It's not questions, but question IDs. And then we are not submitting the questions. We are submitting only integers. Now, when you change this, initially it was questions, right? But this time we are going for the IDs, right? Now, in this case, when you only have numbers, we cannot go for many to many. What you do is in database, we use something called element collection. So when you have numbers or a specific type, which is only one, so you can use element collection. But yes, if you have an entity type, a different table, then many to many makes sense. Now, going back to quiz service here, I think it should work now. So set questions, there's still some problem. I think in the quiz service, no. So set questions are not working. Oh, okay. The name is changed, right? So it's not set questions, but set question IDs. That's what. IDs, and then this will take questions. Now, once that is done, it's time to save the quiz in the database. So what we can do is we can use our quiz DAO and we can say save. And what we want to save is the quiz and done. We are saving the quiz. So what we have done here is we wanted to create a quiz. But then if you want to create a quiz, you need to request to the question service, right? Now, question service will give you the questions. And that's what we have done here. And the way you can interact between these two services and the way you can, your quiz service will ask question or ask for something to the question service is with the help of Feign client, which we have done here. We have specified the annotation there. And we can access these three methods, which we are trying to do. We are using only one method here, which is get questions. And yeah, once you got the question, we created the quiz and we were able to save the quiz. We have not tested it yet, but I'm thinking it will work. So let's only test this part, which is, well, let's ignore all the other one. Let's only think about this create quiz. And to achieve that, what I can do is I will just run this code once. Okay, there's one more thing. If you want to enable the quiz, the Feign client, we need to mention here, enable Feign clients. I think that's the only change we need. Let's run this. I hope this will work. Okay, there's a problem. It says it is already in use. Okay, so we forgot to do one thing. In the application properties, in fact, we forgot to do two things. So when we are using the Eureka server, we need to use a name. So I will say this is my quiz service. The next thing we have to mention is a port number, right? So by default, it is using 8080, which is used by something else. So let's use 8090. That's the port number we are going to run this. And things looks cool. Let's run this. And here we go. You can see that this is running on 8090. So that's good. Let's go back to our browser where we have our Eureka server running. You can see it says only one server or one service running. But after refreshing, you can see we have quiz service as well. So now both the application or both the microservices have registered themselves to the Eureka server with different names. One is a question service, which has 2 instances running, and one is a quiz service. But now we are saying that we want to run the generate quiz. How do we do that? So basically, if you want to do that, we need to pass the quiz DTO data to make it work. Okay, so now it's time to run the project, right? So in fact, if the project is running, we want to test it. So let's create the first quiz and let's see if the communication between the quiz service and the question service is really happening. So what I will do is I will open my Postman because that's what we are doing here. So let's go to Postman. And okay, so what is a request? So the first thing you have to change is the port number. So we are running on port number 8090. The next thing you have to mention is the quiz. And the URL is actually quiz/create. So if you go back here, that's what we are doing, right? Okay, so we are into quiz controller. Yeah, so it is quiz/create. So let's go back here. And so that's our URL. So we have to also send data, right? So what kind of data we want to send? It's very simple. If you can see, we need to accept 3 things. That's your quiz DTO, which has 3 things: the category name, the number of questions, and title. Okay. So what I will do is I will create a JSON here. The first thing we need to mention is the category name. So that's category name. And the category name we have is, let's say, Java. We want to get questions for Java. The next thing we want to mention is the number of questions. So I will say num questions. And okay, how many questions we want? Let's say 5 questions. And the next thing we want is the title. So we'll say title. And the current batch of Java which is going on, the batch name is Springers. Let's say Springers quiz 1. That's the title for the quiz. And okay, so with this data, I will click on send and let's see what happens. Okay, we got an error. That's weird. Okay, there's a problem of 500. So let's check our server and let's see what is going wrong here. Something wrong with the Feign client. Okay. So it says not able to find something. What is not able to find? Okay, so path/generate is not found. Okay, that's weird. But if you see the exact URL, let's see. So we are hitting the question service. That's good. And then directly we are jumping on generate. Oh, okay. So if you remember, if you go back to your question service, the generate is basically after question. So we forgot to put the question there. Okay, so it should be question/generate. So if you go back to your quiz service and quiz interface, where is that? Yeah. So you have to say question/generate. In fact, for all, not just for this, it should be question/get questions, questions/get score. So save it and restart the server. I hope this time it will work. Okay, there's no error. Let's try once again, click on send. Oh, it says success, that's good. But is it really working? Let's try that. So there's no problem here. You can see, I think it tried to fire to the question service. Now there's only one way to check if the data is there in the database. So let's go back to our pgadmin, which is not opening. I don't know why. Okay, pgadmin. Okay, so if you can see, we have a quiz table. So basically the quiz DB is a database and the quiz is the table. And if you try to view the data here, yeah, so you can see that we got the quiz and the title is Springers Quiz 1. And if you see the questions, and we got 5 questions. And these questions are actually coming from the question service because quiz has no idea about the question database, right? So the quiz service is actually interacting with the question service. Oh, finally, this is a video where we have basically interacting with the two services. Cool. Let me just check the Eureka server. Is it saying something? Okay, things are looking good in Eureka. Okay, in fact, it is not showing the health. We should have added the actuator as well. You can see actuator is not added. Yeah, but then, okay, let's try to do that later. So yeah, that's how it works. That's how you are basically connecting with the help of Eureka server. So I hope you have enjoyed it till now, where we are basically able to run the project and things are working out. The two services are running out. Also, I wanted to check, we have two question services, right? So when a quiz service is calling the question service, which one is getting called? Let's try to understand that in the next video. So before we get into the load balancing, we have to complete certain things in the quiz service. Now, if you remember, of course, where we have created these three methods, right? So in the controller, the quiz controller, we have create, we have get. So basically, for a particular quiz, we can get the questions, and then we have a submit quiz, right? So when you say submit, it will give you this code. Now, if you look at the implementation, so if you see for the create, we have done the coding, right? So the create quiz is done and it is working. We have tested that before, right? So I will just remove this comment from here because the create quiz is ready. But if you go down, we have two more methods to work with. We have get quiz questions, and then we have one more, which is the calculate results. Of course, we can change this method name if you have some other method that works. We can go with a consistent word, which is get scored. So at this point, just imagine get scored and calculate result are same because both are getting this code, right? Now, these two things are not implemented. Okay, so we want to implement this. So let's start with the get quiz questions. Now, what we're trying to achieve here is for a particular quiz. So let's say we have an ID, right? So what happens is every time I can create multiple quiz for the same topic. So let's say I'm running a batch in this every week. I want to create a quiz. So every quiz will have a different name and different IDs. Now for that particular ID, so let's say if I create a quiz, fifth quiz, so the ID will be 5. And in that particular quiz, I have, let's say, 10 questions. So for that quiz, I want all the questions. And then you can see when you say questions, you don't need answers for it. So you need a question wrapper. So basically, you need a list of question wrapper. So how will you get that? First of all, we are not storing the questions in the quiz table. So if you verify that once again, let me open my PG admin. And if you see, we do have quiz table here. So if I say view all data, so if you can see here, we have number of quiz created. So I was doing some testing. Last time we have only created one quiz. I was doing some testing for different features, and then I've created this too. But ignore that. Let's say I want to work only with the quiz number 2, okay, the ID 2. And then we have one more table here. And if you observe this, we are not storing questions. What we are storing is question IDs. So for a quiz, let's say we have quiz number 2. For this quiz, which has 5 questions, you can see we only have numbers. But then if you want to conduct the quiz, I need questions as well. Now question arises, who has these questions? And the question service knows the actual questions. The quiz only has an idea about the numbers, not the actual question. So now we have to again interact between the quiz and the question service. So how will you do that? It's very simple. So first of all, for a particular quiz ID, I need the quiz. So we'll take that. So I will just uncomment this part. And also I will make some changes here. So instead of optional, let's say I don't want to use optional. It's a good practice, but just for example here, I'm working with quiz directly, right? I'm using this get method. So before we get to the questions from the question service, we need to get the IDs of it, right? So let's say if I specify I want to go for 2, I want all these IDs which is mentioned here. Now, how will you get the IDs? So we have to get that from the quiz ID itself. So if I go back to quiz, it has all the question IDs, right? So in order to do that, let me go back to quiz service. I will use a method. So in fact, I can remove everything from here and let's keep it clean. So basically I need to get the IDs, right? Now that ID will be list of integers, right? That's the type of it. So it's a list of integers and I will say question IDs equal to, and then we need to get that from quiz. So we'll say quiz dot get question IDs. Now, once you get the question IDs, I can request my question service to give me the questions for this IDs. And if you remember, if you go back to your quiz interface, which is also a proxy between the quiz service and the question service, We do have a method which is get questions. If you can see get questions for the ID, it is actually accepting the list of integers. Okay, so we are good. We can just request to that particular interface. So I can say quiz interface, and the method name is get questions for or get questions from ID, and we just have to pass the question IDs. Okay, now what it will return, so let me just go back here. So this method returns a list. In fact, it returns a response entity list question wrapper. So I can simply get that and paste it here. Again, this is not copy pasting, this is code reusing. Why to type the same thing multiple times, right? But you don't do it. So when you are practicing the code, you type it by yourself. So you can see we got response entity list of question wrapper, and we'll say this is questions equal to, in fact, we need to put that here, cut, paste. Yeah, so you can see we got the list of questions, and this is the thing we need to return here. So we have to return questions. So that's what we wanted to return, right? Okay, wait, we don't need to do all these things. We can simply return the response object. So I can say questions. This should be good. Okay, so this is done. So this particular method is done, which is the get questions. And of course, we need to test this as well. So how will you test this? It's very simple. Just restart the server. And we are not making any changes in the question service, right? So I can simply restart the server here. And let's see if this works. So let me open my Postman. And now what request I have to send? So basically, we have to send a get request now. And then it is in the quiz. And what method we have? So if I go back here, the request we are trying to send is this. So we have to say get, and you have to pass an ID, right? So I can say /get/ and the ID is, let's say 2. Of course, we have that 2. And I can click on send, and you can see we got a response, which is the questions, the actual questions. So we got for 17.7, and we can verify that 8.6. So it starts with 17.7. Let's verify from database. So for the quiz 2, 17.7, 18.8.6. So is it right? 18.8.6. That's right. So we are getting the right questions. So this is working. Now we need to work on one more thing, which is the get score. So what if you want to submit a quiz? Now we are calling a calculate result, but again, this is not ready. So again, we have to interact with the question service, because question service is responsible to get this score. We have done that before. So let me just go back to question service. And in question service, if you see the controller, so this is where we are saying get score, which is calculating the score from the question service. And all the operation we are doing in the question service, not in the quiz. The only job of quiz service is to request, right? So quiz is being very lazy here, but that's how we build the system, right? Now, what are things we need? So what I will do is I will remove everything from here. The only thing we have to do is we have to call the get score method, this particular method, which is get score. So who will do that? So it is quiz interface dot get score, and whatever responses you got here, these are the responses you have to send. Nothing much. I will just simply say responses, and what you will get is the result. Now, in which format? So basically, if you go to quiz interface, it will return the response entity integer. So you can just copy this and paste it here. This is what you're going to return. And say, let's say this is the score. Okay. And that's it. In fact, you can also say write or scored. That also works. And we are returning, in fact, we can return the object itself. We can return the score, because that is of type response entity integer. And we got it, right? So this is so simple. Nothing to do in the quiz service. Everything is happening in the question service. We are just requesting it. I hope this will work. Let me try it out. So restart the application, because we have made some changes. And now, after making the changes, let's go back to our Postman. And so we are getting questions. There's no problem with that. This time we have to submit the quiz. Okay, responses, right? And instead of typing it, somewhere we have done the response, right? Somewhere it should be there. Get score. Yeah, this is here. So get score. In get score, basically we have to pass the response, right? So you can see these are the response we have. The changes we have to make is we are sending a post request. The port number is not 8080, it is 8090 this time. And the quiz and the get score. Is it the get score method? Let's verify that. Quiz controller. Oh no, it's a submit. I know we have used different terms here, but let's do that. So I will say submit. And then we can also pass the ID for the quiz. So let's say we are working with quiz 2, and these are the response we have. I'm not even sure if we have the same questions, but doesn't matter. Let's say send, and let's see what happens. We'll change it if it doesn't work. And you can see we got 3. Okay, so this is working. right? And if you make any changes, I think we have done this last time as well. But let's say if I make one more change, if I remove the space from here, which is incorrect, and if I click on send, you can see the score now is 2. So this is working, right? So get score is working, and the get questions is also working. So by doing this, basically we have made 2 microservices, which is running. There's no problem in that. One microservice is able to call second microservices, and whatever features we wanted to implement, it's working, right? But now, remember in the previous section, we have talked about we have 2 question service running. So if I go back to the question service here, we have 2 instances which is running. Which is getting called? We are not sure, right? Is it the 8080 responding to the quiz service or 8081 responding to the quiz service? How will you get to know that? And there's a concept of load balancing, okay? So we'll discuss that thing in the next video. Now let's talk about load balancer. The thing is, when you have multiple instances of a same service, right? Let's say, even if we talk about monolithic application where we have one application, we can have multiple instances of it. That's how you can scale it, right? We call them as horizontal scaling, where you can create multiple instances. So whenever a client sends a request, now based on which instance is free or available, the request goes to that particular instance. So let's say we have 3 instances, and then 1 and 3 are busy. The request goes to second instance, right? That is called load balancing, so that one instance will not be busy with all the requests. So you can balance the load between instances. If we can achieve the same thing in the microservices, of course, every service imagines one application. So let's say we don't have a lot of load on the quiz service. So let's say we are not creating multiple instances of it, we have only one. But let's say the question service is very busy. So what we can do is we can create multiple instances of it. So let's say we have 2 instances. Now when a request goes from the client side to the quiz service, when the quiz service wants to access a question service, we have 2 options there, right? Now, based on the load on each instance, we can decide where to send the data, where to send the request, right? That is called load balancing. Now, in the earlier days or way back, we used to do everything manually, but because of some tools and some libraries, it has become easy now. And with the recent versions of Spring, we get that by default in the system. So the moment you get your Eureka client and Feign, and if you expand your, so let's expand this. So let me expand these external libraries. We do get those jar files by default. So if I go down and if I expand this, you will find a load balancer somewhere. So you can see we have by default load balancers here. So we don't have to add them manually. But the question is how we are going to use it. So you don't have to do any configuration. The moment you use Feign client, it will automatically search for question service, and whichever service has or whichever instance has a less request, it will send the request there. And even if you have 2 instances and if you don't, there's no load, basically it will switch between the 2 instances and you don't have to worry about it, right? Okay, that sounds good, right? But then how we are going to implement this, or how we are going to check this? Now, even if you have not done any configuration and whatever we have done till now, the quiz service was actually sending requests to the first instance and the second instance of question service one by one alternatively. And the way you can see that is, let's go back to the question service and let's only target on the get questions. Okay, so we are in the controller, which is question controller. And every time you say get question, let's say, or let's see which particular instance it is using. Now, how do you differentiate between these 2 instances? With the port number, right? So one instance is running on 8080. The second instance is running on 8081. So what we can do is, we can just print the port which is getting used, and that will solve our problem, right? Now, in order to do that, we need to get hold on something called environment. Now, in the Spring framework, we do have environment, so we can just use that. Environment, the variable is environment as well. And then let's auto-wire this, so you don't have to instantiate this. Now, once you get this environment, I can go back to the method which is get questions, and here, let me print it. So I want to print the environment. Now this has something called a property, and which property I want to target? I just want to get the port number, right? So we can simply do that with the help of local.server.port. So it will tell us which port it is running on, and then it will print on the console. Now, after making the changes, I have to make sure that I restart both the instances of question service. We don't have to restart the quiz one. So let me restart. So we are basically restarting both the services, which will take some time. And I think it's done. Both the services have been restarted. One is running on 8080. The second one is running on 8081. So let me go back to my postman and we'll request to the quiz. Okay. Now what we are getting is get questions. So we're sending a get request for question ID 2. Let's just send, and you can see we got the response, right? But let's verify which instance is getting used. So if I go to the first instance, you can see this has been used, and this has not used yet, which is 8081. Let me send the request once again, and you can see it is again sending to the first one. Let's try once again. And now again, it is using the same one. Refresh. Okay, let me try once again, multiple times. Okay, now you can see after multiple requests, the request is going to 8081. So it is going in random. So basically, whichever service is free. So if I can send multiple requests, and when you get a lot of requests to one particular instance, of course, it will deviate. You can see the request is going to 8081 and also 8080. So alternately, it will send, not exactly alternative, but it will check which is the free instance, right? So at least we are getting this by default, which is your client-side load balancing. And at one point I thought it's not working, but yeah, it's working. You can see the request is going here, and we don't have to worry about it, right? Because both the instances are same. So irrespective which instance it is calling to, we're getting the same output, right? So that's how basically you can load balance. Let me try once again. It looks cool. So you can see request going to 8081 and also to 8080. So that's how we can use this. That's how we can use the load balancer. So the way it works is with the help of Feign client. It will help you with the load balancing, and you don't have to do it anything manually. And if you want to print it, you just have to print environment.getProperty, and the property name is local.server.port, and environment variable is this, which is coming from Spring Framework. So just make sure that the environment which you're using here is coming from the Spring Framework, not from Hibernate. Because in the Hibernate as well, we have the same environment type. So yeah, that's it about load balancing, and we're doing it with the help of Feign client and Eureka client. Now till this point, we have done so many things in this project. Basically, we created 2 different microservices, and we have also gone through some concepts. Example, if one microservice wants to call the second microservice, how will they discover? So for that, we have installed, also we have worked with the Eureka server, Eureka client. If you want to make sure that one instance is able to call the other one, or the one service is want to call the other one, what is shortcut way? So we have used Feign as well. Now there's one important concept. Of course, microservice is a huge concept. There are a lot of things, but then one thing which is very important is the API gateway. Now, why do we need API gateway? See, the thing is, if we talk about a user, now user is looking at your microservices. In fact, all your microservices combined as one application, right? Now user has no interest to know, okay, you have quiz microservice, you have question microservice. For user, that's one application, right? So the way to interact with the application should be only one URL. The problem which we are having now is we have 2 services, right? We have a question service and we have a quiz service. Now both these services have a different name, different port number. And when you want to access them, so basically we have to mention the port number as well, right? For example, if you want to work with the quiz service, you have to work with 8090. If you want to work with the question service, you have to say 8080 or 8081. If you want to individually access them without quiz service, right? Now the thing is, apart from this, there are a few more problems. Let's say you want to also achieve authentication. Now you have multiple microservices, and if a user comes to access one microservice, you will say, okay, enter your username password, and you're like, okay, we got the username password. The user can access the resource, but for that microservice. What if a user says, I want to access the next microservice? Now at this point, again, the next microservice will say, okay, tell me who you are. Prove that you are that person. Again, a user will enter username password. Do you want to give this experience to the user where user is logging for every microservice to access? Of course not. A user should access only once. What if you want to maintain the log file? What if you want to achieve some cross-cutting concerns at one place? And that's where we can use API gateway. So this API gateway becomes the entry point or the interface for the user. How do you do that? Now in Spring Cloud, basically you do get the API gateway and we just have to use it. And as we have done till now, for every new thing, we have to create a new project. I know that's the only part of microservices which is tricky, is because every new thing is a new project. Of course, as a developer's perspective, when it comes to the ops, maintaining it, I get in trouble. But the thing is, we are learning microservices, right? It has a lot of features, and we can adjust 1 or 2. So the first thing you will do is you will go to this website, which is start.spring.io. And here what you will do is you will create a new project, Maven. We are making the video. Now we got a new version between the video. So earlier we were working with 3.1.1. Now we got 3.1.2. It should be good. Let's try this. We got com.telusko as my group ID, and the artifact ID is API gateway. Okay, and jar version 17, because in my machine I have Java 17 here. Now the dependencies. We only need 2 dependencies here. The first one is gateway, because of course we need an API gateway, and also we need a Eureka client because it has to register itself to the to the Eureka server. And once you got these 2 dependencies, of course you can add actuator, you can add dev tools, which you can use in the other projects as well. But just to keep it simple, I'm going for 2, gateway and Eureka's discovery client. With this, let's download the project. So you can see we got API gateway. In this machine, I already had 1 zip file, and that's why you can see in bracket it is 1. So let me unzip it. So unzipping done. Let me open this in my IntelliJ IDEA. So open. So navigate it to the folder. And now after unzipping it, I'm opening the project, and this is where you got your API gateway. And that's it. This is your API gateway, is it? Okay, so we have to make few changes. The first thing is, if you look at the SRC, we got 2 files here in Java. We got 1 file in Java, which is API gateway application. And then if you look at the resources, it is application properties, which is empty. And that's it. This is your project, API gateway. Now, why it is API gateway? Because of the name? No, because of the library which you have added, or the jar file which you have added, which is the starter JPA, right? This is your API. The thing is, if you want this to work, you have to make some changes, because by default, if you try to run this project, it will run on 8080, and we already have that port busy, right? So just to give you a number of port we are using, so we have 2 question service instances running on 8080, 8081. We got a quiz service running on 8090. We got our Eureka server running on 8761, and API gateway we need to run on some other server. So we'll set 2 things here. First is cloud.application.name. So let's set this as API gateway. The next thing you have to mention is the server number. Let's say 8765 port number. And we need 1 more thing. In fact, we'll need 2 more things. We'll do that later. So at this point, we have done the configuration. And now let's run this. And let's see if this works. I will right click this and say run. So there's running. Okay, cool. And the port number is 8765. I will go back to my Eureka server to check. So I went to Eureka, and the number of applications running is, you got 2 question service running. We got 1 quiz service, and we got API gateway as well, which is running on port number 8765. So we got API gateway. So now this is your front. Now what this also means is, if you go back to your Postman, remember we were sending requests to the quiz, and the port number is this, but then we don't want directly to access the quiz service. I want to use it through the API gateway. So this API gateway port number is 8765. So every time you send a request for the question service or for the quiz service, this is the way you have to go. From here you will go. So once we get into API gateway, now API gateway has no idea what this quiz is. Example, if I run this code or run this particular URL, it's not working because the API gateway has no idea what this quiz is. Now, this quiz is a URL, which who knows about this URL? The quiz service. If you use question there, who knows about question? It is question service. API gateway has no idea. But what API gateway knows is the name of the service. How? We have used the Eureka client. So what it does is it checks, okay, so we have API gateway knows about 2 things, the question service and the quiz service. So that means if you want to use a quiz service from the API gateway, here before the quiz, you need to mention in caps, because that's what we have mentioned, quiz service. So now we are sending request from the quiz service. So API gateway will connect to the quiz service because of the Eureka client, and then it is able to communicate. See, ultimately, we are trying to connect with the quiz instance or the quiz service. If you run this code or if you run this URL, still not working. Okay, we have to do one more thing. In the code of application.properties basically here of API gateway, we need to set one more thing, which is the locator. So we have to mention spring.cloud.gateway.discovery.locator. By default is false, and you have to enable this. So what you're doing is you are asking the API gateway, hey, I'm allowing you to search, okay, locate the services. In the earlier, before this, we were not allowing it. So now we are allowing it to API gateway, enjoy the search, look for the services with the help of Eureka client. Okay, so it looks cool. Let's go back to our Postman. I hope this time it will work. Send, it worked. So we are basically trying to access the quiz service, but we're not talking directly to the quiz service. A client send the request to the API gateway, and API gateway says, okay, I need to search about the quiz service. It will discover the quiz service from the Eureka server and then sends the request. That's what is working. But then I have one little issue here, which is this particular thing. I don't want to mention quiz service here. I mean, in capitals. Of course, you can also remove the entire part here. We have to do a lot of configuration for that. And we just want to make it simple at this point. This is for beginners, so we'll not be removing this. There are some steps as well to remove this. But at least what I can do is I can make it lowercase instead of uppercase. So I can say service, the quiz service. And now when you send request, it's not working because the capital works, small is not working. At least this looks cool, right? Compared to the capital one. So how do you make it work? You can use one more property here, which is the lowercase. So this is spring.cloud.gateway.discovery.locator.lowercase service ID, because we don't want to go for capital. It will search for the lower one. I mean, it will convert that into lower. And now after making the changes, let's restart. Okay, restarting complete. And now let's try. Send, it worked, right? So this is basically how we use API gateway with a lot of configuration. That can be an advanced part of this particular series, but yeah, this is about the series on microservices. I know we have done so many things. The number of projects which you created is huge. In fact, I'm teaching you all those things and I'm working on different projects. While I'm talking to you, see, as a trainer, we have to be very attentive because when you're working somewhere and if you take a gap in between, that works. In videos, it will not. So sometimes even I get confused which service I have to go. I'm telling you that you have to go to question service, but in my brain, it takes some time to register which project I have to open, right? Maybe there should be a Eureka server in my brain as well. That will be weird. Anyway, so we were working with this 4 projects: the quiz service, the question service, the service registry, API gateway. Just to give you a brief, when a user wants to play the quiz, first we need to create the quiz, right? But when you say create quiz, where are the questions? Now, question belongs to the question service, right? In the question service, we can add questions, we can remove questions, we can search for a particular question, we can generate questions for quiz, we can get questions for a particular ID or list of IDs. We can also calculate the score and everything we have done in the question service. In the quiz service, basically we were asking the user what you want to do. You want to create a quiz? Okay, I will do it for you. But actually quiz service is doing nothing. It just says, hey, question, generate a quiz for me. Smart, right? So the thing is, we have 2 microservices, and then we were also able to do load balancing because of Eureka client and Feign. But then we don't want to directly interact with each individual services, and that's why we have used API gateway. So as a user, I will interact with the API gateway. API gateway will interact with the other services. And how do you search between different services? And that's why we have Eureka client and Eureka server, and we have seen that as well. I know when you are doing this project, there will be a lot of issues. So let us know in the comment section. And also you can join the Discord channel. You will find the link in description. And you can ask your question there. People will be happy to help you there, and we will also be there to help you. So that's it from this video, and that's it from this series basically. And I will also try to work on the advanced part of it. Until then, enjoy the other tutorials coming up.